It's been about a year since Samurai Warriors 5 was released, a game which heavily cut down on the actual time period of the Sengoku Jidai that is usually covered, to instead give us a shorter and much more personal story. And although I was afraid this decision would make the game in the long run feel lesser because it covered less time and less characters we had previously seen, in the end the game still ended up being pretty decent. Not necessarily better than the highs of Samurai Warriors 2 or 4 or Spirit of Sanada, but still a great time and a solid foundation to build off of, to either continue the rest of the story of the period and eventually give us an amazing Empires title. But sadly, from what I can tell, we really have not heard anything as of yet regarding what the next Samurai Warriors title will be or when it will be coming. So, in the meantime, I think it would be fun to speculate about what we might see in future games. Now, I've already talked a bit about what I'd love to see feature-wise in future Samurai Warriors games, so I won't go too deep into that. If you want to hear more on my thoughts on the series and what I would love to see feature-wise moving forward, check out the other videos and reviews I have done on the series so far, which I will link down below. But what I really think would be awesome would be to talk a bit more about characters. Historical samurai figures that I feel have been left out for far too long and are overdue to see their very own unique characters in future games. This won't be from the perspective necessarily of if Koei were to continue the story of the Sengoku period moving forward after the end of the events depicted in Samurai Warriors 5, but rather figures who lived during the height of the period during the years that most of these Samurai Warriors games cover, going from around the year 1560 to 1615. Obviously, over the years, Koei has continued to greatly expand upon the roster, not just in their usual Samurai Warriors releases, but also in more unique games like Spirit of Sanada, and even Samurai Warriors 5 in particular, which, as we have discussed, took a more narrow approach in terms of time, and thus were able to give us a glimpse of plenty of lesser-known figures because of that. It's because of those games that we are finally able to at last see significant figures like Sanada Masayuki, Saito Dosan, and Mori Teramoto, with other surprisingly great additions like that of Yasuke, and my personal favorite new character, Okabe Motonobu. But with that said, what I have done here is compiled a list of 15 names, figures who have not made their way into the Samurai Warriors series yet, but were famous and important enough that they really need to be given unique characters sooner rather than later. And for those of you who don't know, the reason I'm saying unique characters is simply because most, if not all of these characters are actually already in the games. They just are sadly not playable outside of Empire's versions, and the character models are just generic reskins of many other samurai officers present in battles. What I am talking about is each of these figures getting their very own fully fleshed out fancy new model, weapon, and so forth. Because, let's face it, they probably deserve it by now. The last couple of things I want to say before we dive in is that I will not be going super in-depth regarding each of these figures. Rather, I will just be talking briefly about who they are, why they are important, and through this, why they deserve to be added into the Samurai Warriors roster. Yet on top of that, in terms of importance, I will also sort of be categorizing these. For the most part, I'll be discussing all these figures in no particular order, but instead I will be separating them into two groups. One category for more major figures who are a bit more significant, and another category for minor figures who, while still important, are not as huge. To put it simply, the major figures category are extremely significant characters I think we need, while the minor figures are still very important figures who I would very much like to see, but perhaps not immediately need. So with that said, let's start things off with the major characters first, before moving on to the minor. Keeping in mind that besides these two groupings, they are not listed in any particular order. Starting off, let's get the ball rolling with Hosokawa Tadaoki. Tadaoki is an extremely significant figure who is long overdue for his own unique character in the Samurai Warriors series. Son of Hosokawa Fujitaka, Tadaoki would become a prominent figure who would go on to not only serve Oda Nobunaga and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, but also Tokugawa Ieyasu, playing a pivotal role in the build-up to and at the actual Battle of Sekigahara. Not to mention the extremely significant fact that he was also married to none other than the daughter of Akechi Mitsuhide, the Christian convert who would come to be known as Hosokawa Gracia. Both Mitsuhide and Gracia already have unique characters in Samurai Warriors. It's time for Tadaoki to have one as well. He is literally one of the most important samurai of his time, and led the Hosokawa into a new age of glory after their troubled past throughout the early years of the Sengoku period. Next up is Ukita Hideye. Hideye was also a prominent lord under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who would also come to play a massive role at Sekigahara, this time remaining loyal to the Toyotomi and leading one of the largest contingents of troops on the Western Army side of the conflict. But besides that, he was also much more. He was also distinctly one of the Gotairo, the Council of Five Elders or Regents that were set up by Hideyoshi to safeguard the country and raise his son after his death. So far in the series, we have a unique character to represent every other member of the Gotairo besides Hideye. Figures such as Tokugawa Ieyasu, Mori Teramoto, Maeda Toshiie, and Kobayakawa Takakage, who would of course pass away and be replaced by Uesugi Kagekatsu. All of these extremely famous and important figures have unique characters besides Hideye. It's time to change that. After Hideye, let's move on to Otomo Sorin. This one really still confuses me. How the hell do we not have an Otomo Sorin yet in Samurai Warriors? Sorin is arguably the most famous leader of the Otomo clan, largely because he led them to their height while also being one of the most well-known daimyo who converted to Christianity. Sorin and the Otomo clan of northern Kyushu were the main rival force to the Shimazu clan of southern Kyushu, not to mention the fact that he was also the reason why Hideyoshi even invaded Kyushu when he did, being that it was Sorin who pleaded with Hideyoshi for aid against the Shimazu. Now, in the Samurai Warriors series so far, the primary opponents to the Shimazu on Kyushu are mostly shown to be Tachibana Muneshige and his wife, the female warrior Tachibana Ginchiyo. In reality, these important figures actually served the Otomo during their wars against the Shimazu, which of course then once again reiterates that Sorin is a much needed character in the series. Following Sorin, let's move on to another famous Christian samurai, Konishi Yukinaga. Yukinaga is a figure who continually gets more and more fascinating the more you read about him. Another loyal general under Hideyoshi, he would end up being gifted territory in Higo province in Kyushu after Hideyoshi invaded. But guess who else received territory in Higo as well? Kato Kiyomasa. Both Yukinaga and Kiyomasa are historically remembered to be some of the fiercest of rivals, both fighting in the Imjin War and continually trying to overperform and outdo one another to gain Hideyoshi's favor. Kiyomasa would even invade Yukinaga's territory during the Sekigahara conflict, when Yukinaga had decided to support Mitsunari and Kiyomasa to support Ieyasu. By the 1590s, Yukinaga was one of the most influential figures in all of Japan, and even famously had the ear of Hideyoshi, who was turning more and more senile in old age. In the end, I feel that for all of these reasons, he would make for an absolutely fascinating addition. Following Yukinaga, we are going to be remaining in Kyushu for yet another entry, Kuroda Nagamasa. Kuroda Nagamasa, like other names I have already mentioned, was a significant figure within the Toyotomi regime. He was also the son of the famous Kuroda Yoshitaka, or Kanbei, someone who does already have a unique character in-game. But in terms of Nagamasa, he would go on to become an instrumental figure during the invasion of Korea, and of course later play a major role at the Battle of Sekigahara, where he would support the Eastern Army. It is also believed that it may have been men under his command who were responsible for the death of the prominent Western Army general Shima Sakon at the battle itself. But to top it all off, he also has one of the most distinctive looks out of all of the daimyo throughout the Sengoku period, wearing his famous Ichi no Tani Kabuto, which is meant to resemble the slope of a mountainside, but often comes off looking more like a giant sail on his head. There is a famous story that this Ichi no Tani Kabuto actually first belonged to Fukushima Masanori before he traded it to Nagamasa, but as far as I'm aware, there is still some debate regarding that. Either way, Nagamasa definitely wore this wacky helmet, and I would love to see how it could be in some way incorporated into the look of his character. Koei, please make it happen. Yet, moving on, the final major name that I think we need to see brought on might be a bit of a controversial one, seeing as he didn't actually do any fighting. Well, these games already like to stretch the boundaries of real history enough as it is, so my final entry is that of William Adams. Now, if you don't know who William Adams is, I made an entire video just discussing him, which I will link. But basically, he was an English navigator on a Dutch trade vessel that would reach Japan in the year 1600, just as the events leading up to the Battle of Sekigahara were heating up. He would go on to be taken in by Tokugawa Ieyasu, and the two would form a strong bond, as Adams became an extremely significant and influential figure in the Tokugawa regime moving into the Edo period, helping to be Ieyasu's eyes in which he could see and learn about the outside world, free from the lies and schemes the Portuguese and Jesuits had been using to build up their own presence in Japan for some time. Adams would in time be granted an official position within the Shogunate, gifted land, remarried, and even given a new name, Miura Anjin. In fact, he is even the character we play as in the first Nioh game, a game also made by Koei. And surprisingly enough, Koei has already put him into another Warriors game, Warriors All-Stars. So we already have everything we need for William Adams to simply be cut and pasted into a proper Samurai Warriors title. It would be an easy home run, and especially with Koei already including Yasuke into the roster from Samurai Warriors 5, I have a strong feeling it won't be long until William Adams makes his first appearance in a Samurai Warriors game. Now, so far we have covered 6 major figures I feel we absolutely need to see in a new Samurai Warriors release. But there are plenty more names out there, historical figures that, while interesting and even significant, we probably won't need ASAP, but rather still would be awesome to see eventually. I have compiled about 9 more of these names for the solid 15 that I came to. So, with that said, let's start off in no particular order, with Sengoku Hidehisa. Hidehisa was a prominent commander during the height of the Sengoku period, leading forces during the invasions of Shikoku and Kyushu, along with fighting at the sieges of Orawara in 1590 and Ueda in 1600. He is sort of a controversial figure though, who failed a number of times and even managed to get his ally Chosokabe Motochika's son and heir killed at the Battle of Hetsukigawa. Next up, we have Niwa Nagahide. Nagahide was a long-time Oda clan commander who would later end up serving under Hideyoshi as well. He was a rather important figure in both the Oda and later Toyotomi regimes, and honestly, I am very surprised he did not make it into Samurai Warriors 5, a game that focused heavily on the Oda already. He is someone who definitely needs to be brought in sooner or later, as he really is one of the more prominent samurai leaders of his time. There is even an interesting theory that his death in 1585 was actually done by seppuku and not of natural causes, as he had maybe felt remorseful for Hideyoshi's rise to power being greater than that of his old lord Nobunaga. Fascinating stuff. Following him, we have Hojo Ujimasa, who I am pretty confident that we will be getting a full unique character for soon enough. When his father, Hojo Ujiyasu, the Lion of Sagami, a figure who we do have a character for, died in 1571, he would be succeeded by Ujimasa, who would essentially rule the clan for the rest of its existence. This is all throughout the height of the period, and we really need a solid character to fill that gap of leadership in the Hojo family during that time. It would make sense that Ujimasa would soon enough make a proper appearance. After Ujimasa, let's move on to Mogami Yoshiaki. Yoshiaki, known by the nickname the Fox of Dewa, was another prominent leader in the north alongside the famous Date Masamune. We really don't have unique characters for a lot of the northern lords, and that needs to change. And I feel Yoshiaki would be a fantastic first addition in that regard. He was ambitious and even fought against the Date on occasion. Of course, later he would come to wisely submit to Toyotomi rule, and then later, during the Sekigahara conflict, would support the Tokugawa and fight alongside the Date against the Uesugi. Definitely an important figure who needs to be added. Following him, we have Ryazoji Takanobu, a figure often called the Bear of Hizen. Takanobu is generally depicted to have been an ambitious, big, burly figure. He had cemented his rule out of the ashes of the former Shoni clan of Hizen, and over the years had tried hard to expand his own sphere of influence, only to later be killed at the Battle of Okitanawate. This would pave the way to the rise of the next figure I want to include, that of Nabeshima Naoshige. Naoshige would seize the reins of power over Hizen shortly after the death of his lord Takanobu. He would go on to serve Hideyoshi and fight valiantly during the invasion of Korea. His own loyalties are hard to determine throughout the Sekigahara conflict, yet he would still make it through the ordeal with his lands intact. Years later, his fame has grown exponentially, thanks in large part to the popular samurai text, the Hagakure, written by a Nabeshima samurai of the Edo period named Yamamoto Tsunetomo, who referenced Naoshige from time to time in his work. Following him, we have Hosokawa Fujitaka. Fujitaka was the father of Tadaoki, who I mentioned earlier as a character I feel we need. Once again, Fujitaka is also a character I am surprised to see that we did not receive in Samurai Warriors 5, being that he played an important role in working alongside Shogun Ashikaga Yoshiaki. Fujitaka was highly regarded and would later come to play a major role during the Sekigahara conflict, well into his old age. Up next, we have Takigawa Kazumasu. Kazumasu was a prominent Oda clan retainer who would take part in many battles. He was even given land in the east, and for a time, the famous Sanada clan was made subordinate to him, before the death of Nobunaga caused him to lose his land and flee back westward, which then later he would oppose Hideyoshi and take the side of Shibata Katsuie during the Battle of Shizugatake. Finally, the last name I have is that of Ikeda Tsuneoki. Tsuneoki was yet another prominent Oda clan veteran who had served Nobunaga all the way from back during his early years in Owari, and would too go on to take part in many battles during Nobunaga's rise to power. After Nobunaga's death, he would support Hideyoshi and, famously of all, play a pivotal role during the Battle of Komaki Nagakute, where he would engage with the forces of Tokugawa Ieyasu during the largest engagement of that conflict. It was here he would be defeated and slain, causing Hideyoshi to lose his opportunity at a decisive victory. Those altogether are 15 names that I was able to compile as figures who I would like to see added to the series. I know they were a bit more heavily geared towards figures who served each of the unifiers, and not a lot of extra figures who fought for other significant clans. So as you can imagine, there are plenty of other names of famous figures I did not mention. Figures like Chosokabe Morichika, Koto Mototsugu, Sue Harukata, and many more who could easily be added to the list. There are plenty more names out there, and arguments can be made for all of them. The ones that I mentioned here are really just my preliminary thoughts on who I would like to see. I guarantee you in the weeks to come, plenty more will pop into my head that I'll be mad I didn't mention. So please comment more you'd love to see down below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. What other famous samurai figures would you like to see make an appearance in the Samurai Warriors series? But with that said, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most interesting.